The history of the Roman Catholic Church has been painted in such detail by various historians that it seems there are no secrets left. For example, the Institute of the Papacy. According to the works of historians, we can find out the detailed biography of each of the popes. 266 people have held this post throughout history. We are told in detail what the popes did and what they dressed in, why the pope wears a fisherman's ring, and why this ring is destroyed after the death of the pope. The theologian is still arguing about the symbolism of the papal tiara. Someone sees in its form a symbol of the egg, which means the beginning of life itself, a symbol of power over the three spheres of heaven, earth, and the underworld. Others see the tiara as a hint of the Holy Trinity, but no one has intelligibly explained why popes of Rome no longer wear tiaras since 1963. The last pope to wear a tiara was Paul VI. In November 1963, during Mass, he defiantly put a tiara on the main altar of St. Peter's Cathedral, and never wore it after that. It was announced that the tiara would be sold, and the proceeds would go to charity. The tiara was bought by the Archbishop of the Archdiocese of New York, Cardinal Francis Pellman, for the Roman Catholic Church of the USA, and taken to New York in 1968 year. Currently, the tiaras of the sixth pope are kept in the Basilica of the Immaculate Conception of the Blessed Virgin Mary in Washington, and are regularly displayed during exhibitions. The tiara of Paul VI differs significantly from the previous tiaras. Like the rest of the tiaras, it is made of a silver case, but it is distinguished from others by a more modest finish. The body of the tiara, lined with red velvet, is encircled by three thin gold coronets. A few metallic lily flowers are located on these coronets. The lower part of the ara is encircled by a massive gold bracelet inlaid with precious stones. The weight of the tiara is 4.5 kilograms. It is unclear why Paul VI refused the tiara in 1963 year. After all, 12 years later, he issued the Apostolic Constitution, which recommended the use of the papal tiara in the following papal coronations. The tiara, of course, is a mysterious and beautiful thing, but in the Pope's vestments, there are more mysterious objects with an ambiguous purpose. Here, it seems to be a completely ordinary thing: gloves. Liturgical gloves, they are also called episcopal or papal gloves. That's what historians say about the purpose of these gloves. Initially, the papal gloves had a purely utilitarian purpose, to keep the hands of the priest performing the service warm, because most of the temples were either not heated or were poorly heated. In my opinion, it is a very strange version if we compare the weather conditions in Russia, where priests do not wear gloves during worship even in winter, and the Vatican, where the air temperature is much higher than zero for most of the year. And at the same time, priests do not wear gloves in cold Russia, and gloves are a mandatory attribute in warm Italy. Here is another historical version of what the papal gloves served for. It turns out that, in the Roman Catholic Church, some church relics can only be touched through a special handkerchief or gloves. Now the Pope and other bishops are very rarely seen wearing gloves, even when they hold in their hand those relics that in the 16th century could only be touched through a handkerchief while wearing gloves in addition. Here is a picture of the 17th century. It depicts Pope Leo I. As it should be, he has a tiara on his head, thick gloves on his hands, and he holds a staff. Here is a photograph of our time. For some reason, the papal staff is held without gloves and not through a handkerchief as in this engraving. It can be seen here that the bishops wore gloves and a handkerchief in order to hold the staff. For some reason, in these paintings, the Pope is wearing gloves, as historians say, in order not to freeze his hands. We also see that the staff is taken in gloves through a special handkerchief. Here is another interesting picture of two bishops wearing gloves, although judging by the landscape, green grass and trees, it's not a cold season and there is no point in wearing gloves. So in the 16th century, gloves were not worn from the cold, and not even in order not to desecrate a relic, for example, this staff. After all, popes in the 20th century quite calmly take this staff with their bare hands. Here is a group of high-ranking priests wearing gloves, only those who hold a staff. It seems that it's all about this staff, namely the properties that it possessed in the 16th century. Then it could only be kept in tight gloves. Nowadays it is not required. Staff, pastoral staff or bishop's staff. It could be carried by a high-ranking Catholic, as well as Orthodox, Eastern Orthodox, Anglican, and some Lutheran priests. Also, this staff is part of the tradition of Jewish Christianity. In the Western Church, it has this curved shape. The bishop or head of the church carries this staff as the shepherd of God's flock. The cross is another name for this staff. In Eastern Christianity, this staff has a different shape. We see that the staff could have had different shapes, but it was held in the Middle Ages only with gloves. Strange staffs are designed to control a human herd, almost like in science fiction movies. In some paintings, the staff has translucent parts. Even the young Napoleon did not dare to hold the staff with his bare hand. Now traditions have been abandoned, and the staff is sometimes held through a cloth. But earlier there were mandatory gloves despite the presence of fabric. Now, he explains the rules for using cloth, so that the bishop does not leave his sweat on the staff to keep the latter clean. Not only men had the right to carry such a staff. Here is a blasphemia, as it should be, holding this object, wearing gloves. It looks very much like some kind of energy weapon, like Zeus, which is metal by lightning. Maybe in the 16th century, these staffs could no longer work at full strength, but there was always some kind of energy potential on the surface that did not allow taking this staff with bare hands. Now let's move on to the next suspicious item that was used for religious purposes. This is the hand of Saint Teresa and the curl. Teresa, also called Saint Teresa of Jesus, was a Spanish noblewoman who chose the monastic life of the Catholic Church. She was a famous Spanish mystic, religious reformer, theologian in contemplative life and psychic prayer. She received the rare part of being named a teacher of the Church for 4 centuries after her death. 40 years after her death, in 1622 year, Teresa was canonized and became one of the patron saints of Spain. She was buried in the convent of Alba de Braque. 9 months after her death, the coffin was opened, and it was found that her body was not damaged, only her clothes had rotted. Before the body was reburied, one of her hands was cut off, wrapped in a scarf and sent to Avila. On the 25th of November, 1585, the body was dug up again to move to Babylon. In appearance, the nun's body was recognized as incorruptible. At the request of the nuns of the Alba de Braque monastery, the second hand was separated from the body and left in the monastery. The body of Teresa was transported to Babylon and reburied in the house of the head of the destitute Carmelites. In 1616 year, Teresa's body was moved to a new chapel. The body is still there to this day. The most interesting thing in this story is what the silver reliquary looks like, in which the hand of Teresa is in an imperishable form. The reliquary is made in the form of a papal glove with the same decoration on the wrist. It seems that most of the saints of Europe wore such gloves to control the staff. Here are some more interesting bronze hands from the beginning of our era, which were used to worship Sabazius. Very strange objects, as if they were trying to replicate the hand of some robot or alien. Let's return to the staff that serves to control the human herd. It can be seen that this is a rather complex structure. Unlike a simpler staff with a cross, you need to keep it in gloves. Perhaps a similar staff is mentioned in the book of Exodus. When God appeared to Moses in a burning bush, God asked what Moses was holding in his hand. Moses answered with a staff. The staff miraculously turned into a snake, then back into a staff. During the Exodus, Moses stretched out his hand with a staff, and the waters of the Red Sea parted. Then he struck the rock with his staff, and water flowed down the rocks. Moses also used a staff in the battle of Rephidim, between the Israelites and the Amalekites. When he raised the staff up, the Israelites won. Of course, one can be doubtful about what is written in the Bible, and maybe the popes wore gloves because of the exceptionally cold Italian climate. But it seems to me that the papal tiara and the staff are the remnants of other technologies that may no longer have been able to work at full capacity in the Middle Ages, but they still made an impression on the crowd, and it was simply dangerous to take them with bare hands. If the staff in the hands of a bishop can still be explained from the point of view of ordinary historical science, but how can it be explained that a person in the vestments of a bishop holds a vira? Vira is a ritual mythological weapon in Hinduism and Tibetan Buddhism. Having an important religious significance, the vira symbol has spread to many parts of Asia. In Indian mythology, the vira is Indra's weapon in his fight against the Asuras. This is a powerful weapon that combines the properties of a ball, a mace, and a spear. The word has several meanings in Sanskrit: lightning and diamond. Vira was also depicted on ancient coins of the Mediterranean region. If we look at this image of the vira, we will see that it clearly intersects with lilies, the heraldic symbol of the power of European kings. Papal tiaras are also decorated with lilies. Viras also often found in ancient Greek images, and even the Sumerians used vira. Now, there is very little information about what kind of energy was used in the Middle Ages. We can only see glimpses of that knowledge, and such a glimpse is the paintings of the Middle Ages. That's it. Watch my channel.